U.S. diplomats set to engage with Syria's new leaders. For the first time in years, U.S. diplomats are heading to Damascus on a formal mission, aiming to connect with the newly established rulers led by the Islamist faction, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS. HTS, which has its roots in al-Qaeda, has recently adopted a more moderate stance, sparking global interest in its governance approach. Concerns and protests following al-Assad's fall. The removal of Bashar al-Assad marked the end of an era of repression and civil war, but it left a legacy of unresolved challenges. Questions loom over the rights of women, minorities, and the future of the Kurdish region. In Damascus, protesters chanted for democracy and women's rights, reflecting a growing desire for progressive reforms. Kurdish demonstrations against Turkish aggression in the northeastern city of Qamishli. Thousands rallied to support the U.S.-backed Kurdish-led forces facing threats from Turkey. Protesters called for unity, chanting slogans like "The Syrian people are one" and "No to Turkey's attack." International responses and new diplomacy. Major powers, including Turkey and Iran, have called for an inclusive and representative government in Syria. U.S. diplomats are in discussions with various Syrian factions to explore paths toward stability, emphasizing respect for all communities. Women's rights and political representation in focus. Despite progress, some comments from interim leaders have sparked backlash, particularly on women's roles in politics. A retired civil servant expressed anger, asserting that women would no longer remain silent on issues of inequality. UN and global perspectives. The UN Secretary-General hailed al-Assad's departure as a symbol of hope, but warned of challenges ahead, including ongoing Israeli airstrikes and violations of Syria's sovereignty.
Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're tackling a situation that is changing by the day. It really is.
It is, yeah.
Syria.
Yeah.
After Assad.
Right.
And, I was looking through the sources you sent over. It's a real mix. We've got reports from, like, the UN, news articles, even some firsthand accounts.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is. So I'm kind of curious to dive into all this with you, to be honest. I feel like our mission today is to try and understand what this next chapter, what this new chapter for Syria looks like. But
it's going to be tough.
It's tricky. It's a real head scratcher.
It is, yeah. The sources really underline that. I mean, we've got Bashar al-Assad, who ruled for, well, a long time.
Decades.
Decades, yeah. He's out.
Gone.
And which, on the surface, a lot of people would say, hey, that's good, right? But it's not that straightforward.
It never is.
No. There's a group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and they're emerging as a major player.
Yeah. I mean, that's where things get a little murky.
Right.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, HTS has, like, deep roots with al-Qaeda, which is obviously...
It's a red flag.
Yeah, concern. But then we see them presenting themselves as, like, moderates.
Right.
They're even in talks with the U.S. It feels like a gamble for everyone involved. So what do you think? What's driving this change? Like, is it genuine?
Well, if we look closely at the sources, it's a really complicated picture. Some experts seem to think HTS is really trying to rebrand, moving away from their more extremist past.
To gain legitimacy.
Yeah, exactly, both at home and internationally. But then you have others who are much more skeptical.
Right.
They see it as a way to, like, consolidate power, a tactical move.
So it's like, how do we decipher that? What are we looking at here? What suggests genuine change versus, like, a power play?
Yeah, it's the big question. The sources do point to some concrete things that HTS has done, like they've come out against attacks on civilians, that they're focusing on providing social services, even participating in some local elections. But at the same time, we can't ignore that there are still some, key figures within HTS.
Hardliners.
Yeah, hardliners, who still hold pretty extreme views. So this internal struggle between, you could say, pragmatists and ideologues, that could really determine where the group goes.
Okay, so we have the U.S. stepping into all of this, engaging HTS diplomatically, and it's been a while, years.
Yeah.
Feels risky. What's the best that can happen? But also, what could go very wrong?
Well, some of the sources suggest the potential upside here is, maybe this engagement with HTS could help stabilize things a bit.
Okay.
Bring them further into the mainstream. Maybe even help counter those more extreme elements we were talking about.
Push them out.
Yeah, potentially. But the risks.
Yeah.
Huge. This could totally backfire. It could legitimize a group with, a very troubling past. Violent past, yeah. And alienate some key allies in the region.
I'm thinking the Kurds.
Yeah, especially the Kurds.
Because the sources we're looking at, they don't paint a good picture for the Kurds. And I mean, they've been so vital in fighting ISIS.
Absolutely.
But now they're facing this aggression from Turkey.
Yeah. Turkey sees them as a threat.
And I mean, this is a group, they've already suffered so much.
They have. And you can really feel it, their voices in those firsthand accounts.
Yeah.
Those protests in Komishli.
Calls for unity.
Yeah. There's this deep fear of being abandoned by the international community. It's a stark reminder that any solution, any lasting solution in Syria, it has to address the Kurdish question.
Which is...
not easy.
No, it's not an easy one to answer. And it's not just the Kurds. I mean, we're seeing protests in Damascus, too.
Right.
Citizens demanding democracy.
And women's rights.
Yeah, there's one story, actually, that really stuck with me. It was about a retired civil servant.
Yeah, I remember that.
She was worried, deeply worried, about losing the rights that she had fought so hard for. And it really made me think, is this new Syria, is it actually going to be a step forward for women?
I mean, it's a completely valid concern.
Right.
We know that under Assad, women in Syria, they made a lot of progress in terms of education, employment.
Yeah.
And now there's this real fear that those gains, all that progress, could be reversed under a more conservative leadership.
So where does that leave us? What are we looking at for Syria's future? What has to happen for there to be any kind of lasting peace?
It's a long road ahead. It's incredibly complex. I think the ideal outcome, what everyone hopes for, is a truly inclusive government.
One that represents everyone.
Exactly. One that represents all the different communities in Syria. But to get there, it means navigating this minefield of competing interests.
You've got the U.S., Turkey, Iran.
Russia. And that's not even mentioning the factions within Syria itself.
It's a lot.
It is.
And then you have, the threat of violence still. Israeli airstrikes are still happening. There's always the potential for more instability. It feels like the stakes are just incredibly high.
They are. And it leads us to a question I think everyone listening needs to really think about. What role can the international community play in all of this?
Yeah.
Not just in containing the chaos, but in supporting a future for Syria where everyone, all Syrians, feel safe, represented, and empowered. It's a question without an easy answer, but it's one we have to keep asking.
That's a powerful thought to end on. This has been eye-opening, to say the least. Really puts into perspective how fragile, how complex this situation is. Thanks for walking us through all of this. And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more deep dives. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.